starting it now.
Ah.
It's populating. Just give everyone a couple of minutes to join.
Yeah. So as people come on, I guess they can hear us. So we're all sitting relaxed and ready.
Yeah.
Spread across the country. How's the weather in the north of England, Penny?
I can see a little bit of blue sky. Doesn't look too bad, a bit cold.
You've got a beautiful blue sky behind you.
I do.
What about you, Phil? What can you see?
I can see a map of the world, James. So it stretches out in front of me, above the screens. So I'm actually looking at Mexico.
Oh, very nice.
Are you in Mexico?
No, unfortunately not. It might be some time before we get there.
Excellent. And Lauren, you're in the Midlands, I believe.
Yes, I am. And we have actually got blue skies all around us today. So it's a bit chilly. It's nice and sunny.
Excellent. Well, I too can see blue sky out of the shed window, and the birds sitting on the bird feeder.
You haven't asked Sam how it is down in the Humber.
It looks pretty grey on the back.
That's how I remember it.
Well, Phil, you always brought the water. That's the thing. Always rained when you were here on the Humber.
Okay.
Right. Well, we've got about 50 people.
Okay.
We are expecting about 60. But
That's fine.
I think we will kick off now, if that's okay with everybody.
That's absolutely fine. You kick us off, Lauren.
Okay, so hello and thank you for joining us this morning for our webinar on how to develop a licensed water supply borehole. First, let me start by introducing your hosts. James Dodds is our chairperson and water management specialist. He has over 30 years of experience in consulting and is a nationally recognised expert in water resources management, with a strong reputation for his regulatory tenacity and ability to negotiate abstraction licenses. Dr. Phil Hamm, our Managing Director, is a principal hydrogeologist with over 15 years experience working with natural water systems. He has a particular interest and expertise in the development, management and regulation of independent water supplies. Penny Jenkinson is one of our principal hydrogeologists and has over 13 years of consultancy experience. She specialises in water resource hydrogeology and has a wealth of knowledge and experience in developing private water supplies across a range of sectors. Samantha Walton is our guest speaker this morning and is the Humber Energy Manager at Associated British Ports. Sam has over 16 years experience at ABP, and her main aim is to make the Humber ports as sustainable as possible across all utilities and energy sources. So now for some general housekeeping. Throughout the webinar, we will ask you to remain muted and enter any questions into the Q&A panel. We will be answering all your questions in our Q&A session and introducing a few polls throughout. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website tomorrow. Anyway, enough from me. I'll pass you on to Phil, who will kick off today's webinar.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Lauren, and thank you for everybody for joining us today. Normally at this time of the year, we would be welcoming you all face-to-face at our annual Borehole conference, but, well, that's just not possible this year for the obvious reasons. So instead, we decided to release a series of informatives about the borehole development and licensing process, which have come out to you over the last few weeks. And hopefully they've been dropping into your inboxes or on your social media feeds. Today's webinar is intended to bring that series to a conclusion, and we really want to try and bring it to life and explore some of the themes through a real project case study. And we're very grateful, very fortunate to be joined by our client, Sam Walton from Associated British Ports, who has very kindly agreed to assist us with that. This provides a different and important perspective rather than just listening to James, Penny and me rattle on about boreholes and licensing. And I assure you that Sam is straight talking, and with her insight, she will tell things exactly as they are, particularly around that project. This webinar is not intended to be a lecture. We do have some slides for you, but our aim was to keep it quite conversational, and so you'll see us interacting a bit as we describe that project at Grimsby Port. As Lauren has said, we'll pick up questions and answers at the end. I know a couple have come in already, but use that Q&A box to submit your questions as we talk through the slides. Before we get into the case study, we're actually going to get you, the audience, to do a little bit of work. So unfortunately, no webinar is for free. This one's certainly not for free. So don't sit back and relax just yet. In a moment, Lauren's going to bring up a poll and ask you 2 questions. You're going to have 15 seconds to answer each of those questions. So you do have to be quick. And Lauren, I think I can see the poll coming up now. Do you want to just say when the time starts, and then people can fill in their answers?
Yeah, so I've just put it up now. I'm just about to close it. I've got about, should I give people a little bit more time, because we've just got about 30 of 54 answers in. They're slowly coming in now.
I could rattle on about boreholes for a bit, Phil.
Oh, not just boreholes, James.
Right, so I'll end it there and I'll just share the results.
Okay, so it's interesting results there. That's the categories that you put yourselves in. So we've got a good number of people who own and operate boreholes.
And that's always what we designed the Borehole Users Conference for, wasn't it, Phil? It's really good to see people, real people involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Regulators, people who are looking to develop supplies, others, unfortunately, we can't ask them or they can't shout out where they're from, but yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. The second poll, Lauren, can we run that?
Yeah. Just bear with me a second. That should be live now if everyone wants to click on.
So again, 10-15 seconds is all you get.
That's it. I'm a bit more lenient than Phil. A few seconds either side. It's just coming through now. And I think that's it. I'll share those results as well.
Okay. So that's interesting. So we've got a range of experiences, skill levels and experiences when it comes to boreholes and licensing, which is good to see. And I think we're going to come back to that at the end, Lauren, aren't we? And pose that question again, and hopefully people. Well, hopefully you've learned something, but we'll see what those results tell us at the end of the webinar. Okay. Thanks for that, Lauren.
No problem.
Right, so I'm going to hand over to Sam now. She's going to introduce our project case study, which is all about a borehole construction, or 2 borehole construction projects actually, and a licensing project at Grimsby Port. So yeah, Sam, the floor is yours. Tell us why you first got interested in boreholes and why.
Thanks, Phil. Just a little bit of background about the port itself. So Grimsby is one of 21 ports that are owned by ABP right across the country, and one of 4 that is within the Humber region, which is what I look after. Traditionally, its major operations have always been in fish. More recently, they've moved into a lot of car imports, and we've built specific mechanisms for that in the port. But the future for Grimsby is definitely green. Lots of you will probably be aware that in the Port of Hull, we've got Siemens Gamesa building wind turbines. Well, in Grimsby, we run the operations and maintenance bases for the vast majority of the North Sea offshore wind. So they will bring in and out all of their crew and various other activities. So this very much fits in with where ABP want to go in its future, aiming to be as self-sustaining as possible, and also to be as carbon reduced as possible in the future. And I know that doesn't really have a huge amount to do with water, but it's just an aim from ABP to be as green as possible. And that means managing all of our resources in the best and most effective ways. So we acquired this a license, and it's definitely not an exaggeration to say we didn't fully appreciate what it was and the importance of it when we got it, but we started to have a look at various different options of what we could do with it. The license was on a piece of land that's actually separated from the port estate itself, and we needed to understand what we could do with it, whether it in situ, so whether we pumped there and then piped into Grimsby, or if we sold on the water under some sort of PPA into the local suppliers. We've got some experience of boreholes because we've got some in the neighbouring port of Immingham, so we knew that there was an opportunity for that, but we just weren't sure whether we could apply that in its totality to Grimsby. The licence itself is a 1.2 million cubic metre licence per annum, but it hadn't been operated for a number of years as the land had become the manufacturing plant that was there had been run down, and we'd bought the land for other purposes. We were in the process of looking at all these different options for what we could do with it. We were introduced to James and EnviroWater, and the rest of this is history. I would just like to point out that I was in attendance of the Borehole conference last year, and if any of the attendees today saw how grey and pale I looked last year, that's because I had no clue at all about what we were talking about. Hopefully, now I do know a little bit more about what we're talking about, and as we progress into completing this project in 2021, hopefully I will be fully conversant with this subject.
We haven't paid you to say that, Sam, but you may get an invite to come back and speak at the 2021 conference.
I would just like to point out that Phil says I'm straight talking, and I think that's probably something to do with my northern roots, but I would just...
Okay. So I mean, you went into this project, Sam, with I think, yeah, in your own words, with very little sort of knowledge of that borehole development and licensing process. We'll hopefully pick up upon that as we talk through talk through that process now. We're going to walk through the various steps that we went through, and hopefully you'll share some of your experiences along the way with that, and how certainly that knowledge has improved. Okay, I think if we move on to the next slide, Lauren, and James, if you want to talk through that early part of the project, which you largely led in terms of that feasibility element, then I think that's a great place to start.
Thanks, Phil, and thank you, Sam. Our history with this project goes back sometime before ABP, and we were involved in the site that held the license for on and off for 5 or 6 years before ABP got involved. But that that's a whole nother story, which Phil will shout at me if I go back that far. I think one of the key challenges to this project is that the whole project team has deep northern roots, so we're all as belligerent as each other, really, and straight talking. But we overcame that. The series, the handout series, starts with the feasibility study, and a feasibility study for a borehole project can take many forms. It can be very simple, a simple prognosis that lets us know what the geology, local hydrogeology is, and it can extend right out to a complex piece of work. There were particular challenges with this project. The first challenge that we needed to think about quite hard was the fact that new abstraction licenses aren't issued or are rarely issued in this particular part of the world. And that graphic there is showing a big red area that we're sat in, where one would consider that water is not available for licensing, or groundwater is not available for licensing. Yeah. So that's a bit of a challenge. It's a challenge that we regularly take on, but it is not one to be ignored lightly. The second issue that we had to grapple with was one of saline intrusion, and one of the reasons that the North Lincolnshire coast has been closed to new abstraction for many years is because saline intrusion was always a problem, particularly when the large industrial supplies like the one that we're talking about were all operating together. That was causing a saline intrusion problem. So the starting point of our feasibility study for this project was less about the geology and the hydrogeology and more about a discussion with the Environment Agency about what we call a pathway to licensing. And that process took probably about 6 to 8 months to establish a way in which we could approach the abstraction licensing process that would allow ultimately an abstraction license to be granted. That was before we'd drilled any holes, before we'd done any desk study work or much desk study work. Penny and I engaged with the Environment Agency, brought key people together and talked through the challenges and mechanisms to overcome those challenges right at the beginning. That laid out a pathway, and it was that pathway that was followed through the rest of the project. Yes, it included at some point the development of conceptual models, which Penny will talk about in a minute. But we had to set the road ahead clearly for Sam. This is a big risk operation for Sam and ABP, and I can assure everybody that Sam, despite what she said, did know exactly what she wanted and know exactly the risks that she wasn't prepared to take, and we needed to be very clear in laying out where the risks lay, both in terms of the overall project and in terms of cost. So I think I'm going to pass that back to you, Phil, at that point in time.
Well, I mean, I was just thinking as we're talking through, to our audience, but particularly people who are about to embark on this process, 6 to 8 months of a lead-in time, James, to agree something with the Environment Agency. I know what we do, but is that normal? Are all projects like that?
I think, it's important not to big up projects. There's many borehole development projects that don't need that. It's straightforward. If the licensing process is going to be straightforward, then you don't need to make it complicated. I suppose I'm tinged with the fact that you, Penny, and your colleagues roll me out when it does get complicated. So I tend to get involved in the complicated ones.
But you love it, James. You always told me you like the complicated ones.
Well, that comes back to our northern roots, Sam, doesn't it?
It does.
But what is important in all projects is that you have a stop and think moment right at the beginning and ask yourselves the question, is it going to be complicated? Is it going to be simple? And if it's not going to be simple, what are the steps that I need to go through in order to make sure that I get what it is I need at the end?
Okay.
As you know, if something comes up on a project for us and we think the answer is categorically no at the beginning, we're not going to embark on it. You know, there's no point in embarking on it. But in certain situations where it looks challenging, there are pathways through in order to be able to get to an end point, which is what we're doing.
All right, thanks, James. That's a good point or good time to move on and let Penny talk to us about that initial regulatory process, then following that feasibility element. So over to you, Penny.
Thanks, Phil. So yes, as you heard there at Grimsby, a good deal of the regulatory work was completed during the feasibility stage. However, this is where the formal regulatory process begins. This process initially consists of submitting application forms to the Environment Agency to confirm the proposed rates of abstraction and locations for the new boreholes. And then following this, a water features survey is completed to identify any at-risk features and to address the particular concerns of the Environment Agency in that area. Due to Grimsby's industrial past, there were lots of features in the 3-kilometre radius that was specified by the Environment Agency. And this included a number of licensed abstractions and private water supplies. And there were over 300 water well records listed on the British Geological Survey database. So that's a lot of things to consider in that particular area. The map on the right there just shows the key features that we identified through this process. But it's important to say that the water features survey is not just a list of what's there. It's about considering the site setting, the geology and hydrogeology, and developing a good conceptual model for the area. And that's done by using a number of data sources, including published maps and literature, satellite imagery and LiDAR data in this case, and obtaining available monitoring data. And then at the end of that process, undertaking field verification visits. So going out to view the water features and boreholes. And by doing this, the at-risk features can be identified through an impact assessment.
Okay.
I was just going to add in there, finding some of those water features on the Port Estate was incredibly difficult.
Yes.
So thank you to Penny and Phil for being persistent in trying to find them. We now know where they are, which is brilliant.
I was going to say, we found some things we didn't even know we had, Sam.
Yep, there was one very odd looking structure that looked like some sort of witch dunking system, which I wasn't aware of. But luckily, that wasn't one that we needed to test, which was good.
Yes, and yeah, it's important that you might, from your desk study, you might have a list of things that you want to see, but when you actually get out there and have a look, there are other things that become apparent that that are really important for you to consider as part of your impact assessment. Okay. So just looking at that conceptual model there on the left hand side, that was developed through the study that we took at Grimsby. The geology consists of a thick clay deposit above the chalk aquifer, so the aquifer that we were going to target with the new boreholes. This means that surface water features and shallow boreholes are separated from the chalk aquifer, and so they weren't at risk from the proposed abstraction. The only potential impact was to a couple of nearby boreholes that abstracted water from the chalk. During this whole process, we had an open dialogue with the Environment Agency, and we agreed a suitable programme of test pumping and a scheme of monitoring. So in this case, the monitoring comprised collecting water level and quality data from the new boreholes and 4 identified off-site boreholes, which would allow an assessment of the impact on the chalk aquifer and on the nearby sources.
Okay.
And then at the end of that process, the consent was issued to allow us to drill and test the boreholes.
Okay. Thanks, Penny. I'm just mindful of time and moving on. But is that just on that process? Is that normally how it goes? You've described quite an involved process there. But any sort of final comments to people about to embark on that or have embarked on that? What are the take-home messages?
I think the take-home messages are doing a thorough water feature survey. It's a really critical part of the process. If anything's missed at this stage, it means that you could end up missing important features that could cause you big problems further down the line. And if you don't develop a good conceptual model of the area, you could end up monitoring a huge number of features that you just don't need to, but you don't have that conceptual model to rule those features out, and it just becomes very, very expensive.
Yeah, no, I mean, of course I agree, but from my experience, it's worth. You shouldn't cut a corner at this stage. It can really cost you further down the line, and certainly from what I saw at the Grimm's report, by investing in that water features survey, we ended up with a scheme of monitoring that was appropriate. We weren't monitoring everything in that area, not those hundreds of features that were there. We're monitoring the right ones. Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about the construction and testing, and this is always the fun bit of the project. And as you can see from the images here,
I'm not sure I agree with that bit, Phil.
Well, I would strongly disagree, James, as you know. But it's when things physically happen on the ground. So it's when you actually see stuff happening. It's not all desk-based anymore. It's also where the bulk of the money is spent in the project. So it's fair to say that you've got to get it all right. But you make a mistake here, you're going to pay for it. The images that you can see here, they are, well, 4 out of those 5 images are from Grimm's report. I think you can spot the one that's not. But what you're seeing there, those top 2, that's the drilling site. So quite a large drilling rig there. You see the borehole there on the drilling rig and the borehole there on the top left. The image there next to it is all the plants and equipment behind the drilling rig that is required to drill the borehole. So it's not just a rig. There's generators, there's skips, there's tanks, there's all sorts of equipment there, lay down area that's required to actually construct the borehole. And the borehole itself, when it's finished, as we'll talk in a second, is actually has quite a small footprint. The borehole construction at Grimsby was fairly involved. I expect Sam will chip in a minute. And as geology, as Penny says, the geology comprises about 30 meters of clay on top of the chalk bedrock, and it's the very top of the chalk that we were looking to target here, because that's where all the fresh water is at Grimsby. So the key to us was to construct the borehole just to target that very top bit of the chalk aquifer. If we drilled it too deep, there was a chance that we were going to get saline water, which is not what we wanted, and drill it too shallow, and you just don't get enough thickness of the chalk aquifer that gives you the yield that Sam needed. Fortunately, it's not all a guessing game. You know, there is some science behind that, and at Grimsby, as part of the construction project, we carried out quite a lot of geophysical logging, which is the image down there from European Geophysical on the bottom left. Obviously, that's not at the port; it's a very different borehole, but it does show the process very well. And we carried out a lot of geophysics, running tools, geophysical tools down the borehole. It's a bit like Time Team in the back of a van, and from that you're able to understand the geology, exactly where you are in the sequence, understand the inflows coming into the borehole, and the quality of those inflows. So that allowed us to set casings at the right depth and get the construction right. The other important part of the construction program at Grimsby was around what I call borehole, or what we call borehole development, and that's when all the construction's finished, when we've got some water in the hole. It's what we do to improve and maximize the yield, and there's lots of techniques that we can use to do that. But at Grimsby, we're in the chalk, in carbonate geology, so we acidize the borehole. That might sound a bit scary, putting acid in a hole, and to be honest, it can be scary if it's done in an uncontrolled way. But it's a very common technique in the water well drilling industry, and when it is done right, it vastly improves yield. So we took our initial yield from the borehole up by about 3 times in this case, making the hole very hydraulically efficient in the process.
Sorry, Phil, can I just butt in ever so slightly there? Obviously, we've talked about this being the exciting part of the project, but from a client's perspective, this was always the nail-biting aspect, because this is where we sunk a lot of money in, not necessarily 100% knowing that water was going to be of an appropriate quality for us to use. One of the things I should have potentially mentioned earlier is that we own and operate a water network which doesn't only supply our port activities, but also an array of embedded tenants on the port estate, and that water quality needs to be of a certain drinking water standard to allow us to transfer that water and to supplement the water that it would be coming in from the national network with our own borehole water. So this was the point where I had sleepless nights until we drilled the borehole and we'd done some sampling, and it wasn't completely salty or full of whatever else could have been in there. So from a client perspective, yes, it was exciting that we finally got something, but it was also the most scary part, because I'd had to put my name on the line to get all the funding to put it to this way, and we could have lost a lot of money had the water quality not been there.
And I think that's a really important point, Sam. And you know, and sometimes as the consultants, we I'm going to say we forget. I'm not sure we forget, but we lose sight in the excitement of getting the work done. We do sometimes lose sight of the fact that for the client, there's a lot of money being sunk in the ground here, and it can be difficult for clients to understand that. It can, you know, it's quite a non-intuitive process that you spend all the money and you only get permission to abstract right at the end. And I know you and I and David went through that on numerous occasions to get that message to land. It's you know, it's an expensive.
It was a risk.
Yeah, it's a risk. It's a risk, and managing that risk is important.
And it's also managing the risk of the shareholders. So we are a commercial entity. We do have to answer to the shareholders, and getting that money approved with a reasonably assured that we'd be able to get the water quality at the end, but not guaranteed, was difficult, and we had to jump through a lot of hoops to get it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just flagging the time, by the way.
Yeah,
all right.
Okay.
That's all right.
All right, no problem.
So we'll come back to that towards the end. Just to wrap up there, I mean, the testing process, the construction was where the work was done. The testing process in this case was actually quite straightforward. That image there, bottom middle image, is what you see of a test pumping rig. There's not a lot to see, pumps in the hole, some pipe work, flow meters, and away it goes. And in this case, the system responded pretty much as we expected. So there's not a lot to talk about there.
Any problems with the discharge place, Phil?
There's a few problems with the discharge point. We'll come back to that. So we'll let Sam feed into that in a moment. But what you end up with at the end of this is on the on the far right there. That's the borehole that you see at ground level. There's not a lot to see, and as Sam says, all the time, effort, and money is the bit that you can't see. It's the bit below ground that's cost all the cash. So yeah, you don't get a lot for your money at the end of the process.
Well, you can't see a lot.
Yes, you can't see a lot for your. Sorry, Penny.
I was just going to say the headworks there are obviously above ground. Is that important?
Yeah. Thank you. You can all deliver this presentation if you like, but yes, above ground headworks is one of the things that we always bang on about. Can be constructed below ground, but the best location for headworks is above ground because it stops things getting into the hole, surface water ingress, all that. The other bit on here is it's a fully sealed headworks. It's nice and shiny. That is a fully sealed headworks. And that's important to ensure that hole remains in a sanitary condition. So yeah, there we go. Just mindful of the time, as Lauren says, that we should just move on to the licensing, and we'll pick up those questions at the end. See some coming in on the Q&A as well.
Okay, so by this point, as you can see from the previous steps, a lot of hard work has already been undertaken, and if you do it right, the licensing should be a smooth process, and that's certainly the case for Grimsby. So for all new applications, there are two parts to the licensing process. There's the technical reporting and data analysis to support the license application, and then the liaison with the regulator throughout the determination period. And the liaison with the regulator is really important. At Grimsby, we had an ongoing communication with the Environment Agency, and we were heavily involved in the design of the monitoring conditions on the license, and that ensured that ABP ended up with monitoring that they could easily implement and manage. And overall, the license was issued within about 3.5 months, so that was about 1.5 months earlier than scheduled.
Okay, and is that the process out, obviously it came in ahead of schedule, which I think it's just testimony to the process we went through early on in the project. But just around that regulatory liaison, Penny, is there anything you want to say about that? Because I think that's the bit that, well, I would say that's the bit that's often missed. People bang in the application, but it is important to track it through the process.
Yes, most definitely. You should be speaking to the regulator throughout the license determination period. This will allow any issues to be flagged that you can address as quickly as possible. You can then have some early input into into various aspects. So in this case, it was really important to be involved in the design of those monitoring conditions, just so that implementing them on site was something that would be, an easy task to do, rather than making it something very difficult to implement and manage.
Okay.
We knew that was coming, didn't we, Penny? Because
Yeah.
in the very early discussions that we had with the area technical team, we'd highlighted various things around salinity monitoring. So as we went through the technical assessment, we could build a technical argument for the various salinity trigger levels, etc., based on historic data from other places, which we were then able to link back to the National Permitting Service and the determination of the license, which is obviously a different bit of the Environment Agency than the local technical team. But keeping all those components together as we went through it was really important in delivering a functional license.
Just mindful, we want to answer some questions shortly. The image that Penny had there on the right hand side, that the importance of that is getting a license isn't straightforward everywhere in the UK. If you're looking at a new abstraction, what that picture's all about is it's a real challenge. All those light blue colours, you're going to have a real challenge getting a license. So don't underestimate this part of the process. We'll move on. So this final slide, it's actually my hobby horse, as you probably know about that, because I always say, borehole isn't just about drilling a borehole, licensing one. It's for life. You've got to love your borehole, all of that. Treat it like any other engineering asset. Monitor it and maintain it, and it will deliver you years of reliable service. If you don't, you will end up with a whole host of problems, which are some of those images on the right hand side of the slide.
None of which are in Grimsby, I'd like to point out.
No, indeed, because we're setting up with you, Sam, a robust monitoring and maintenance strategy, which you'll be able to fulfill in the years and decades ahead. So you're absolutely right. But no, I mean, genuinely, there's a serious message behind it. I'm not going to say too much more about it, because I've said enough probably in the flyer that went out in that final series. Just collect some basic data. Abstraction rate, water level. They're usually regulatory requirements anyway, but collect them to understand how your borehole is performing over time. You need to monitor it over months and years, look at the trends, and then make sure you're carrying out maintenance when you see things deteriorate. If you see the abstraction rate drop off or the water level drop off, it means something's happening in the borehole, and what you don't want to do is be operating on a program that when the water stops coming out the tap, then you do something. A preventative maintenance schedule is always going to be the best approach for maintaining that supply. And Sam, I will bang on about that lots with you over the next few weeks and months. So I apologise in advance.
Don't worry,
Phil, is it difficult? Do you need Phil Hamm to be involved every week to collect data and look at it? Sounds a bit of a RC job, to be honest.
Well, I like to be involved. But no, it is straightforward. If the borehole's been constructed right, you'll have access to put those instruments in. They can be wired back to an energy management system or a BMS if you've got that. You can have simple instruments that you can effectively monitor manually or with a data logger. So it is straightforward. I think we've released lots of information on that, how to do it simply, but but collect some data and look at it and see what it means.
And I think just to add to that, Lauren, I'm very aware of time, I'm sorry.
No, it's all right.
But from our perspective, and again, looking at risk profiles and various other bits and pieces, our borehole water needs to be backed up because of the criticality of the asset structure that we're looking after. So we've got an added complexity in there that we've got to have a backup supply, which is from our Anglian Water Services, which is our water operator in the area. And we had to secure those aspects in, and then add in an extra level of complexity into the borehole water distribution system to make sure that if demand outstripped what we could get from the borehole, which is unlikely, but if it did happen, that we have a backup reserve to be able to pull upon. And that added more complexity than in Phil's drawing here that you can see. And so we've actually gone down a SCADA computer system, looking at various different alert levels to monitor everything, so that we can do that and also be able to do it remotely as well.
Yeah. Okay. James, would you, I think it's time to probably wrap up. Some final messages, and then just let's take those questions that we've received through the chat.
Yeah, we've got questions coming in, so I'm going to make this slide really, really quick. The abstraction licensing can be complex. There's a system there, and there's a system to follow. Allow time. Just give yourself time right at the beginning to think about the process. Develop your pathway. It may be a short path and it may be a very straight path, but just think about it and give yourself time to work through the stages. Access the right technical and regulatory expertise for your project. Being absolutely honest with you, that may be no expertise. It might be a straightforward, simple borehole in an area that has no abstraction licensing issues. Just crack on and do it. It's not, in that situation, it's not overly complicated as long as you follow the process. And you'll get there. But if it isn't straightforward, please get the support that you need, because it will save you a fortune in either a failure of your project or in shortening the process time. Once you've got your borehole, as Phil's just said, it's for life. Look after it. You can even love it if you wish, but definitely look after it. It's an asset there that many businesses are based on that asset. ABP, it's an important part of their portfolio. They're not using the water as a feedstock as such, but it's an important part of their service offering. Other companies, the borehole is the fundamental basis of the business, whether it be food, brewing, distilling, soft drinks, water bottling, all sorts of things. If the borehole fails, the business effectively stops. May not fail, but it certainly stops. So think about it in that context. I'm just going to finish on one point, because somebody has asked a question on the different devolved nations. We've been discussing in this presentation about a project in England. The regulator is the Environment Agency. The Environment Agency within this context is split into two bits. One is the local technical area teams, and the other one is the National Permitting Service. And we've worked through that. Wales is covered by the same basic legislation, but they have a slightly different way of handling applications, and their abstraction licensing policy and approach to licensing is a little bit different. Scotland is controlled by totally different legislation. it's more modern legislation. And while the objectives of the Scottish system are the same, i.e. we need to make sure we protect the environment, we need to be able to demonstrate that resource availability is there, and that we can justify the water that we want to take, their system's different. It's just a different, the steps come in a different order, basically. So understand which nation you're working in and understand the systems that go behind them. Northern Ireland is different, again, a more essentially a more straightforward direct path through the Northern Ireland Northern Irish system. Okay, we'll sum up properly at the end. We're now going to go into the question and answer session. I'm going to try and handle this. We've got about 10 minutes, so I'm going to fly through them. I'm going to pose the questions that are coming in to a panel member, and you've got to answer them hopefully accurately but quite succinctly. Okay, I'm going to try and keep quiet, which I know will be a challenge. Penny. ABP inherited a license via land acquisition. So why did they need a new license?
So the license that ABP acquired was on an adjacent piece of land.
Mm-hmm.
And as we were drilling new boreholes on a different in a different area, the new boreholes needed to be licensed with their own license, and so that involved removing part of the license, removing part of the volume that from the license that ABP held, and moving that portion over to the new licenses.
Excellent, good, thank you very much.
Well, to the new license.
I've answered the question about devolved administrations. I
think we've got a couple on costs and some around the testing and monitoring.
Yeah, yeah. So the question, did you have to drill specific observation boreholes? You didn't mention that. And if not, why not? Phil, I guess.
Oh, I'll take that one. No, not in this case. So just coming back to that water features survey that Penny was discussing. Lots of features in the Grimsby area, and out of those, we were able to select some appropriate monitoring points to monitor during testing. So it's no, not in this case. There are other projects where yes, you do have to design and construct specific observation holes because you don't have that luxury. You don't have something nearby or that is adequate and appropriate to monitor.
And I guess you'd want to know that in your feasibility study, really, wouldn't you? Because that's going to be another chunk of money if you've got to go out and drill those.
You want to pull as much forward as you can. Sometimes we don't have that luxury, James, as you know. But yes, identifying as much of that up front. You know, it's all about de-risking the later stages of the project. Worked on a project recently where, to be frank, we didn't do that, and we did actually end up having to construct a dedicated observation hole, which in that case added best part of 10 grand to a project which wasn't expected, and that can be hard for was definitely hard for the client to sign off on when they've got a fixed budget. So yes, if we can get it up front, that's when we should do it.
We've said that, I guess this is Penny, we've said that a borehole's for life, yeah, but abstraction licenses have expiry dates on them.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the process of renewing the license, you know, and is it like, you know, could it just all end, the borehole's lost because the license isn't renewed? What's the likelihood of renewing that license?
Yeah, so yes, all new licenses are issued with an expiry date, which varies depending on which part of the country you are in, and approximately a year, well, not a year, maybe 6 months or so before the license expires, you should be completing your renewal application to submit to the environment, well, in England, the Environment Agency to renew your abstraction license. And as long as you have a continued need for the water, you can justify from historic usage and projected future usage, you have a need for the water. You still have the legal rights to access the borehole. There's no there's nothing.
Presumption of renewal.
Yes, that's the word.
Phrase.
So as long as the abstraction isn't causing any environmental issues, the license will be renewed.
I think the other bit to add in there is that's where that monitoring piece becomes important. You know, so most licenses, well, all new licenses will come with monitoring conditions. Usually, definitely for abstraction, and sometimes for other things like water level and chemistry. Making sure you collect that data and you've got a good evidence of your historic abstraction and that you have met those conditions is important for license renewal. If you don't do that, you risk not getting that license renewed. You also risk lots of other things along the way if you're really in breach of those.
Yeah, that's an important point. It's a question actually for one of your clients, Phil. But how regularly should boreholes be inspected? For maintenance purposes. In terms of actually going into them, going into them as opposed to standing and looking at how shiny they are.
Yeah, I mean, every borehole is obviously different, so there isn't a fixed period. What we would recommend, if you're going to survey and want to know what the engineering condition or the health of that hole is, then look to do it every pump change. Obviously that's assuming you're not doing a pump change every couple of weeks, but if you carry out a pump change, say 3-5 more years, look to combine it with a condition survey, because that's the opportunity to do it. You have to, you can't, unless you've got a very large diameter borehole, you have to have the pump out of it to be able to run the survey. So that's the best time to do it because it's the most cost-effective time.
Right. Okay. They're flooding in, and we've only got 4 minutes to go. So we will answer all the questions, but it's just
I think that might be very, very important, James, is given the no water availability status of the aquifer, did the regulator seek to reduce or recover some of the part licensing? And I think the answer to that is yes, they did.
Yes, they did. Yeah, indeed. We have a wider project with the license, and as part of that we are there will be some goes back, won't there, Sam? That goes back.
There will, yeah. So of that 1.2 million license, James Penny and one of my colleagues managed to get the Environment Agency to agree to look at 15 years backdated data rather than 10 years, which was standard. And as that process went through, the latest abstraction that was of a similar level was back in 2008. So if we're looking for that for the next 15 years from there, it means that if we hadn't have done anything with the abstraction license, we would have probably lost it in 2023 because we wouldn't have had any backdated abstractions to use to bury the license.
That's an important message. I know we're on time, but that's an important message for anyone who has a license. The phrase is use it or lose it. Yeah. If you're not utilizing that license and don't have evidence that you're utilizing that license, you risk losing it at license renewal.
That's right. Yeah. We've got some questions in that are very specific to licensing issues, which I'm just going to skip over, but I will I will give some answers to those by email if that's okay. There's one question in about abstraction licensing in London and the light blue areas. The point we're making about borehole development projects is that you need to understand what the licensing potential is in a particular area. If you're in a light blue area and there's little prospect of getting a license, then with the right support, technical expertise, regulatory expertise, you may be able to find solutions to that problem. That's the point. We could talk for hours about abstraction licensing in London, but that would only get me on a hobby horse, and Phil and Penny and Sam would lose the will to live on it. Similarly, abstraction licensing in East Anglia, we will move away from that one today. Final question. There was a question that came in by email, which is all about the cost of water, abstraction, and how it related to water company charges. In very simple terms, an abstraction license comes with a charge. That charge is an annual charge for the volume on the abstraction license, not on the amount of water you take. If you are paying for drainage from a water company, then it's important that you tell your water retailer that your drainage charges can't be linked back to the obviously the water use charges, because the two are disconnected. There's no link between a water company charge and your abstraction license charge. So you need to just make sure you're not getting charged for the wrong things for your drainage charges. Okay, that's it. That's 12 o'clock. Everybody's going to race off and get their sandwiches. Penny, I think it's over to you.
Penny? Lauren?
Not Penny, Lauren, sorry.
Yes, so that brings our webinar to a close for today. Just a thank you to our hosts, and especially for Sam. And a big thank you to everybody for joining us today. We do have a final poll that I will try and drag up now.
Yeah, let's do that.
Just to see if anybody's learned something today. Hopefully they have.
I have.
Hey,
come on, everybody.
7s and 8s.
So yeah, a few seconds to do that. I think just whilst that's happening, just a reminder, we have released all that series. There's five documents in our borehole series. They give you a starter for 10. You know, they describe the process. We've elaborated on that a bit today, but please do use those as a useful reference for the future.
Yeah, I think I'll end the polling there. So it started at 5, the majority, and now it's 8. So I could say that's a victory on our
You share those,
side.
Good job.
Oh yeah, sorry, I thought I was sharing.
Excellent.
Okay. Well,
and we moved some into the 10.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we'll take that. That's probably
we'll take that.
Yeah.
And offer them a job.
Probably me. Yeah. Okay.
We're here if anybody's got any further questions or wants to look at anything in more detail.
And we will follow up on those questions that we haven't managed to answer, James, and we can we can send those around by email. So yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, great. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hope you have a lovely afternoon.
And thank you, Sam.
Yes, thank you, Sam.
My pleasure.
Right.
You can end the meeting, Lauren.
I'm trying.